Welcome, everyone. This is Brother Doug with the Awakened by Yahuwah Fellowship Group. I'm with my sister Shoshana, my brother Dennis, and my sister Sadie. And we're going to be going into a study today known as Why is it important to fellowship with one another and why we should not be forsaking the fellowship with the brothers and sisters in Yahusha and in Yahuwah Almighty. So we're going to be starting this study off, and we're going to actually first be going into the first category, which is that it's commanded. So I'm going to be first going into there from the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and here we go. So we're going to start with Leviticus 23, verse 4, which says, and I'll be using two specific verse. These are the feasts to Yahuwah, set apart gatherings, or your translation might say convocations, same thing. You shall call in their seasons, or appointed times, or moedim, depending on your translation. So basically, this is showing that these are set apart gatherings. Every feast is a set apart gathering. So we are supposed to physically gather. We're commanded to gather with one another at every appointed time. And I can even go on. I actually will go down to here where it starts talking about the Sabbath, just to show you guys, even on the Sabbath, we're commanded to gather together. Let me just go there. Let me see. Where does it start? That's over. Here we go. The Sabbath, verse 3. One just prior to the one read. 6 days you shall do works, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath, there's only one Sabbath, a rest, a set apart convocation or gathering or assembling to Yahuwah. You shall not do any work. It is a Sabbath to Yahuwah in all your dwellings. So right here we're commanded on the Sabbath day, even every Sabbath we should be gathering with one another. So that's another point I wanted to bring out. So now we're going to go to the second cross-reference here, which is more in-depth here. We're going to go to Numbers 10, chapter 10, verses 1 to verse 8. And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, Make to yourself 2 silver trumpets. You shall make them of beaten work, and they shall be for the purpose of calling the assembly and removing the camps. You shall sound with them, and all the congregation shall be gathered to the door of the tabernacle of witness. So this is actually another commandment too, that the whole assembly is to go to the door of the tabernacle of witness in verse 3. Verse 4, and if they shall sound with one, all the rulers, even the princes of Yashrael, shall come to you, and you shall sound an alarm, and the camps pitched eastward shall begin to move. And you shall sound a second alarm, and the camps pitched southward shall move. And you shall sound a third alarm, and the camps pitched westward shall move forward. And you shall sound a fourth alarm, and they that encamp toward the north shall move forward. They shall sound an alarm at their departure. And whenever you shall gather the assembly, verse 7, you shall sound but not an alarm. So there's different sounds, different type of blowing of the shofar, the trumpets, for different purposes. So Yahuwah is saying you should not sound a alarm. So he's basically commanding that make sure it's not a alarming type of blow of the trumpet for gathering the assembly. So there's different type of sounds from the shofar that will give different, basically for war you have a certain sound from the shofar. For calling the assembly you have a different sound. So these Yasharites had to know how to do that. So verse 8, and the priests, the sons of Aaron, shall sound with the trumpets, and it shall be a perpetual ordinance for you throughout your generations. Now, this is where, honestly, I've really gone back and forth with verse 8, but we're not really talking about, who should be sounding the trumpet in this study, but this is something I've always gone back and forth about with my self-conviction, whether all Yasharites are supposed to sound the trumpet, or only the Levites. That's just something for a different study. But anyway, the point of the reason I use Numbers chapter 10 is that we're called to be gathered. It's a commandment to be gathered with one another. It's actually a commandment by Yahuwah in this chapter to call the assembly to gather together with the trumpets. So that's the reason I use that chapter. But verse 8, I can see both sides of the argument of, only the sons of Aaron should sound the trumpets, or or possibly it's not saying that we can't sound, that non-Levites can't sound the trumpet. So I mean, I'm not trying to go on a rabbit hole, but that is kind of a controversial verse there. But so let's see here. So I did Numbers chapter 10 verses 1 to 8. We got Numbers chapter 29 verse 1. Oh, if anyone has anything to comment about verse 8 or what they think it might mean, that's just something that came to mind for me, that it could go either way, that I don't know for sure.
I'm thinking it's more like an elder, right?
Yeah, possibly.
Because Aaron was in the Levites and the priests, and they shall blow, so they were more, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Some are like we would listen to our elders. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those of wisdom, those that have, I mean, not saying anybody's better, but I think he puts it out there that they are our elders, and so he gives them this position.
That's a pretty interesting look into that. I never thought of that. Wow.
Yeah.
So I guess the next one is Numbers chapter 29 verse 1, and let me know if you guys want to read, or if you want to take it over. Just let me know. So we're going to go to Numbers chapter 29 verse 1 next. And let's see here. We got in Numbers 29 verse 1, and in the 7th month, so this is referring to the Feast of Trumpets, and in the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, there shall be to you a set apart gathering. You shall do no servile work. It shall be to you a day of blowing the trumpets. So right here, it's saying that this feast is a gathering. You are commanded to be gathered with one another. So again, we are supposed to be assembling on this day. Okay, so that was Numbers chapter 29, verse 1. And let's see here. We also got Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 12. And it says here, having assembled the people, so basically the leaders of the assembly have already assembled the people, like past tense, having assembled the people, the men, the women, and the children, the stranger that is in your gates, or that is in your cities, that they may hear and that they may learn to fear Yahuwah your Elohim, and they shall hearken to do all the words of this law. So this to me was a pretty big one for actually being, we should be assembling with one another, because this is actually another commandment by Yahuwah. So that when we're all assembled, we should be hearkening to his law, his commandments. We should be ready to listen to the book of the law when it's being read. Also, this is showing that even a sojourner, a Gentile, is included in this. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I don't know, anyone else have thoughts on this one? Because there's a lot in this verse.
You said Deuteronomy 31, correct?
Yep, verse 12. Yep.
Oh, okay. I forgot to add the 2.
Yep.
I think he makes it very clear when he says gather the people. So he's telling us to tell our brothers and sisters, gather them. So he's really instructing us what to do, and so that we may learn and to fear Yahuwah, your Elohim, and carefully observe all the words of this law. So he's kind of really laying it down what we should be listening to. Even the strangers within your gates. That's kind of like, would you consider that maybe A bypasser, or somebody who's just learning, or somebody who's come to visit. Um,
Yeah, passerby, someone that's lodging for one night. If I
mm,
think about it in modern terms, it's like someone that's not a citizen of the land, that is
mm,
like maybe someone, I would even consider that someone that's on vacation somewhere. Like if we were in our physical land and someone was just visiting, that's a sojourner.
mm,
So I mean, there's in our modern day, there's many aspects of sojourning. There's like a lot more than back then.
mm.
So yeah, but the
Would that?
reason that I brought that out was because that shows that there's one, there's somewhere else that says one law for the sojourner and one law for the natural born. So I think even sojourner can possibly be Gentile. I've seen places where
Right.
it's been
A
universal.
non-believer.
Yeah, a non-believer. So I find that
Mm,
pretty interesting that, especially, in the Christian faith, they say we're Gentiles. I'm like, okay,
right.
well, what about this verse here that says you would be included? So, you should be included to do these things, to keep these feasts, because if you consider yourself a sojourner, they were including sojourners in calling the assembly. So it's just a thought I had.
That's kind of cool because you do get people who are interested to know, well, what is it that you're talking about, or whatever have you. So it is good to open doors, and because Abba only knows what He's doing to touch that person's heart.
Shauna,
He
you want?
moves, I think. Would you say He moves on the believer as much as the unbeliever? Because He can use a donkey.
Go ahead, Shoshana. I see you want to say something.
Oh, I had tried to say something and I was muted, so I had to unmute. I was going to say I have several sojourners in my house, but not a one of them are interested in joining our meeting. And I've tried. Believe me, I've tried. Especially with my son, he joined one time, and that was
Uh-oh.
it for him.
Mm.
These days are just very difficult.
Yeah, well, at least you had them. You called them to gather.
Calling many, but few are chosen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's a perfect example, Shoshana, of you did what the scriptures say. You called them to gather, and it's up to them. So I was more using it as a provoking comment. Believers that want to say that they're sojourners, and they want to say that they're not required to gather on these particular appointed times. Say
Good point.
that's what I was really trying to provoke on this study too. That there's many places where it says you are to include the sojourner, you are to include them in keeping the law, and people that actually believe they're in covenant or in the new covenant, but then want to say that, oh, I'm still a Gentile, I'm a believing Gentile. Okay, well, what do you do with the Old Testament that says that sojourners are to be included? Sojourners are to be keeping my law also. There's places in, I think, Malachi that talk about that, where it says, don't let the eunuch say, who has separated me from his people. And he talks about that I would give the stranger that joins to me in my covenant, that does the things I delight in, a better name than my own children. So I mean, there's verses like that. So that's kind of me personally, what I was trying to provoke with the whole the Gentile sojourner type of aspect, was that even if they're not considering themselves in covenant yet, they're technically included, and so they should,
Right.
they should really look at it as, okay, maybe I should learn about this stuff, maybe I shouldn't have such a closed mind. I'm referring to people
Right.
who accepted Yahusha, but know him by a different name, and believe that they're not required to keep it. I would encourage people that are listening here that might be Christian, you might want to really look at the paradigm. You might be in need of a paradigm shift scripturally. So, and what the Old Testament talks about, that everyone's included. These days are not just for the Jews. Gathering together on these appointed times are not just for the quote unquote Jews. So you might want to really rethink that type of theology. That's just what I was trying to provoke. Was there?
That's almost like a good witnessing tool,
Yeah.
so that they can really chew it out. Like you have some Jehovah's Witness tools that you can minister to them, or maybe share with them and have them go question. Well, this is a really good point.
Yeah.
Because they just seem to think that they're not part of that.
Yeah, and I feel like eventually we're going to do a study fully that's centered around the identity in Messiah. Do you know your identity in Yahushua? I mean, that's a whole nother study for a whole nother day, but eventually we're going to get to that. Where it's going to show that, this identity people have been told is their identity is not even a real identity. It's something made up. And there's no such thing as a separation between the body of Messiah and Yashral. They're one and the same. So that's a study for a whole nother day. But
awesome.
But let's see. Let's continue here. We did Numbers 10, 1-8. We got Numbers 29, I believe I just did, and then I did Deuteronomy 31:12 is where it talks about hearing the whole words of the law and do all the words of the law. That's why it provoked me, because it actually says hear it and do all of it. So not just being a hearer of the law, but do it. So let's see here. Now I think I'm going to go to,
mine says, and carefully observe all the words of this law. I like that one.
Reminds me of something. It reminds me of a proverb that says, he who turns away his ear from hearing the Torah, even his prayer is an abomination. And that's Proverbs 28, verse 9.
And that's one of the wisest men that ever lived. And so saying that, and I think the best place to go next would be, let's see here, our fifth cross-reference we have here is Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25. Now, this is from the New Testament, which, people always say, I listen to Paul. Well, let's see what Paul has to say. People say, Paul's my guy, Paul's my boy. All right, well, let's see here. This is the apostle, the messenger Paul himself, saying, let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works. So we're supposed to be considering other people, and I believe that's the basis on most translations. Will say that, let us consider one another, provoke unto love and unto good works. Then the next verse talks about not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but building up one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. So basically, Paul's warning us not to forsake it, not to isolate ourselves. And in this modern day of technology and social media, it's become easier than ever for people to isolate themselves. And so I want to bring that out, that we should not be isolating ourselves. We should not be, just staying by ourselves on Shabbat and not even assembling with anyone, even via, Zoom or anything, or Facebook or Google Hangouts. And, there's people that won't even do that. They just want to be isolated. That's bad. There's no accountability in that. There's no fellowship in that. And I believe there's somewhere in Psalms where, how good is it to see brothers dwelling together in unity?
The beauty, yep.
The beauty of that. So You know, Yahuwah's ultimate will is for us to dwell with one another. It's not for us to be, you know, completely alone, shut, isolated in a room, you know. So also, let's see here. And also, I want to go to, after that, I want to go to Matthew.
Question.
Yeah, go
Question,
ahead.
brother. So on this, on Hebrews 10, where it says 24 and 25, is there somewhere that is addressing that this day of getting together? Is it on the Shabbat here? Or is it talking, because it's just.
This is like very general. I'll be honest. This is not just Sabbath.
Okay.
This is like,
Okay.
this is like any chance you get, you should not be forsaking the assembly of ourselves together, as the manner of some is. So I think he's referring to that some people just, whether it's appointed time or not, some people forsake assembling together, and we shouldn't do that. It's very possible he could be speaking about the appointed times, but I really don't see him saying that in this chapter. I think he's speaking more on a general level, like all the time, like we, as best as we can, we should be fellowshipping. And, you know, in this day of technology,
And it says,
go ahead.
especially as you see the day of Yahuwah coming near, and we just sang that song about the day of Yahuwah.
Yeah.
It is coming near, very near.
Yeah. He always was looking towards that. If you really look at Paul's letters, he was always anticipating that. There's places in Philippians where he's like, I really want to be like out of the body, meaning he wants to be in his resurrected body. And like, not in this fleshy body. He wants to be with the Master Yahusha already. And he was like, for your sakes, because I know it's necessary, I'll be here on earth, like here right now. But he always was like, I remember a guy named Kent Hovind would always joke around. He's like, it would be like, you better stop preaching us this the good news or we're going to kill you. And he'd be like, oh, really? Take your best shot. I want to die right now. Take your best shot. So, like, you know, that, like, he, you know, Paul was excited for the resurrection. He was excited. You know, so he's always talking about the day of Yahuwah, the day of Yahusha's return. He's always like, you know, I think there's another verse in Romans where he's like, we should be encouraging one another as we are yet even closer as the day, as when we first believed, meaning closer to the day of salvation than when we even first believed. So there's a lot of verses where he's like excited about, he doesn't want to be, you know, in his present body, in his body of, you know, corruption. He was excited to be out of that body. And so
Peter and myself too included.
yes. But yeah. And another big one I really want to get into too is, this is Yahusha's own words. I'm about to get into the book of Matthew 18:20, and this is our Messiah's own words. And this is why this actually led me to get out of the church. Anyone who's listening, this is what led me to believe I don't need a church. I don't need a physical building to gather with my brothers and sisters. Matthew 18:20 says, for where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name,
hallelujah,
there am I in the midst of them. So when I first read that, and I was like, you know, quote unquote, NT only Bible believing Christian, when I read that, even I was like, okay, why do I need to go back to the church? I can just physically fellowship with someone, or in this day and age of technology, we can be on Zoom or somewhere and be with 3 or 4 other people. Why do I need to go to a building? So to me, that's what led me out of the church system. That's what got me out of there. And of course, there's other verses that we don't have the time to get into from the book of Acts and all that Yahuwah doesn't dwell in buildings made by man's hands. You can find that in Acts 7, but we don't have time for that. Let me see here.
you know what's really neat that I noticed?
What?
Well, in this translation, in the King James, it says, for where there are two or three gathered together in my name, it says, I am there in the midst of them. Who also used I am?
Interesting. Yeah.
The Father,
Yeah,
right?
Me and
Isn't
Shushan
that cool?
were talking about this situation last night, and I might have to write down that TJV version. So it says "I am" in the midst of them there. Let me see how
Yeah.
I'm for real quick. I'm gonna see how the Aramaic New Testament, because a lot of times in the Aramaic New Testament, this is a whole nother discussion, but the Aramaic doesn't just say "I am"; it will actually say "I am the living Elohim" wherever Yahusha says "I am." So
Oh,
yeah,
all right.
it's
Look it up.
very, very interesting, very thought-provoking the way it's worded in the Aramaic. But this verse is actually different. They actually don't have it in this verse. I think this is more of him just saying he is there, but there is a possibility that could be referring to the Father there. Where two or three are assembled in my name, there am I in the midst of them, and that's the Aramaic. So it's very interesting. But there is a lot of other times, though, in the book of John where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I showed Shoshana last night. It actually has something added there in the Aramaic. It says the living Elohim in all caps. So
Wow.
yeah, so it's definitely interesting for someone to look into testing the King James versus the Peshitta. Definitely differences. But anyway, yeah, I believe though this at the minimal, Matthew 18:20 at the minimal, Yahusha showing he is there when we assemble together. And the ultimate goal, like others in our belief say, is the ultimate goal is physical fellowship. But at the least, I'm saying this to people on social media, at the least join a fellowship group, at the least join an assembly, get on Zoom, get on Google Hangouts, get on YouTube and fellowship with people. There's Friday night fellowships with so many people in the Hebrew Roots movement. And, you know, guys like a guy that I would consider a brother is Paul. He has a platform for people that don't have fellowship on Friday nights. Okay, so find a group, find something. Don't be isolating yourself. I really want to put that out there. Like, if you can't find a way to physically fellowship, I mean, like literally are not able, there's other ways to fellowship. You know, if you can't physically do it. So I just wanted to put that out there. And also the next one I want to go to, stay in the Aramaic here, because it's very interesting how this reads. This is the next cross-reference we have is Psalms 55, verse 14. I really like how the Aramaic reads this. It says, for we ate a meal together in the house of Yahuwah as we were walking in agreement. And so this is also talking about assembling with one another, not just that, but eating at the same table as one another in Yahuwah's dwelling place. And back then, when Book of Psalms was being written by David, like most of it is by David and his sons. So in that time period, you had the temple in Jerusalem. And so he's referring to actually fellowshipping with a brother of his, eating a meal together, walking in the hall of the temple, and in agreement. And that's another it kind of reminds me of another verse. I think it's in Psalms or Proverbs, says, how can two walk if they're not in agreement? And so that kind of reminded me of that. So it's like, and that's actually in the Masoretic text in the book of Psalms and Proverbs, actually says that how can two walk if they're not in agreement? Meaning, how can two be brothers or sisters in Yahushua Messiah if they don't agree? So I think there's definitely a precedent that we need to be on somewhat similar beliefs. I mean, obviously, no one's going to have the same exact theology, but, you know, there's definitely core beliefs that we should have agreement on. But anyway, that was Psalms chapter 55:14 in the Aramaic version of the book of Psalms. And you can get that on eSword. It's known as the original Aramaic New Testament with Psalms and Proverbs. And so it has the book of Psalms and Proverbs with the New Testament.
Okay.
And so I think the next cross-reference we're going to go to is the book, unless Shoshana has something to add to what I just read from Psalms, if she has anything she wants to add.
No, I think I wanted to add something a little while ago, but somebody in the neighborhood decided to mow a lawn next to me, and I couldn't even hear myself, so I had to mute.
What was it? We can go back to it. What verse was it?
I don't remember. My mind is that quick to lose something.
All right. All right. If you ever have to mute yourself, you can always message here on the Zoom thing, and I'll make a note of it to go back. If you message like the actual chapter and verse, if that ever happens again, and we can always go right back to it. Let me see here. So we were going to go to Acts chapter 2.
One thing I did want to say is that it's very frustrating because there's so many people who don't want to fellowship on Shabbat, and they don't want to learn about truth, and so they do useless activities like mowing the lawn on the Sabbath. That's just what we do.
Yeah.
It's sad. Huh? Well, they don't know any better.
Well,
that just shows you how much they don't know.
They don't want to know. I'm sorry. I've talked to too many of them. They really don't want to know.
Yeah. I think there's a line between ignorance. There's ignorance by choice, and then there's just not knowing. And there's a lot of the times, sometimes, even when you let people know, they just choose to be ignorant. A lot of times, unfortunately.
We have about 5 minutes left.
Yeah. I'm just going to try to get Acts 2:42 in real quick, and then we're going to have to do a short part 2. I mean, it's going to be like really short. All right, so Acts chapter 2, verse 42, and it says, and they were continuing in the teaching of the apostles or messengers, and they became partakers in prayer and in breaking of bread. Now, so this is referring to fellowshipping, and I actually like how the Restored Name King James puts this actually. And they continue steadfastly in the ministers' or apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of the bread and in prayers. And just something really quick here: the doctrine that it's referring to in the Restored Name King James is the doctrine of Messiah. Because Paul always talks about, to continue in the doctrine of Messiah. What's the doctrine of Messiah? Keeping the Torah. So whenever you see in the New Testament doctrine of Messiah or the doctrines of the taught ones, the doctrines of the apostles, it's one and the same. It's keeping the law, the immersion of Yahusha, all that together. That's what the doctrine of the disciples were. So I just wanted to make that clear, because in Christianity they say that the doctrine of Messiah is not the doctrine of Yahuwah. They'll try to say it's not the same. So I just wanted to make that extremely clear. So we can talk about this verse right now, and then we'll have to do a part 2 shortly. So anyone that wants to add to this right now, we still got like 4 minutes left. If not, we're going to have to do a part 2. And we only had like 2 cross references left. It's a shame we ran out of time. So we'll just have to do a very short part 2. But if anyone has anything to add to Acts 2, verse 42.
What I like is that they broke bread. And a lot of people don't. Bread could be what? Could be the challah bread, or is that more Jewish? Or bread means just food?
Depending on the word, I don't think it would be challah bread. It could be challah bread, or it could be leavened bread, depending on what time it was. If it was during Passover, it would have been unleavened bread. If it was just regular, like just regular bread. It depends on the Greek word too that's being used. Probably would tell us. So yeah, but I think it's probably just regular bread because I've looked at almost every translation. None of them say unleavened. So even the restored name translations don't say unleavened bread in that verse. So probably that was like not during the Moedim time, so it wasn't during the appointed time. So I would say it was probably most likely regular bread. In my opinion, it's probably regular bread that they were referring to.
Okay.
So yeah. All right. So if anyone has anything else to add, we still got a few minutes before we get cut off.
I like the continued steadfastliness in mind.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, because it's continually steadfast.
Yeah.
So that says a lot.
Yeah. So, all right. So, all of our viewers right now, please stay tuned. We will be back very, very shortly. We will be doing the last two cross references with 3 verses. So we will be back, and please stay tuned. Thank you for joining us. Shabbat Shalom. And just a last word. If any non-believers have come across us, I would pray that you would accept Yahushua as your personal Savior, and that you would please read John 3:16 and Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 to 9, and that you would accept him as the master of your life, as Yahuwah Almighty as the master of your life. Truly give your life over to him so that he would renew your mind, and that in the last days that you shall be saved. I wholeheartedly just want to say that, and I truly pray that for anyone that's an atheist or any non-believer watching this. Thank you for joining us again. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Stuff.